Now, from China to the US, it's a great pleasure. I'd like to invite to the stage Brad Barbera, Director of Innovations from the Good Food Institute, who will be talking us through clean meats for the 21st century. Thank you, Brad.
Okay, a bit of a switch. I saw the technology you guys have been talking about all day long is digital, and I'm going to talk about meat. So this is probably a little bit different, but this is something that Eric Schmidt, formerly of Google, when he was asked what are some of the biggest trends that are going to change the way the world works, before he talked about blockchain, before he talked about driverless cars, before he talked about anything else, the very first thing he said was clean meats and plant-based meats. So this is an incredibly exciting technology. It has been called the biggest investment opportunity in Silicon Valley these days. So I'm going to give you as quick an overview of the technology as I can, and then open it up for questions. I know I'm standing between you and beverages, so hopefully we'll try to make it stimulating. I'm going to make the case first for why we call this cellular agriculture, and we'll explain why in a bit. I'm going to make the case for why it's important, why it is on trend, talk about the technologies and the current players in the business, and then talk about the investment opportunities, because that's really what it's all about for this area. So why do we talk about cellular agriculture? Animal agriculture is a major contributor to four global issues that people are very concerned about. One is obviously the environment and climate change. One is human health. Another is poverty and food security. And then animal welfare is increasingly becoming something that is very important in the Western world, at least. From an environmental standpoint, when you look at land use, water use, contamination of land from animal waste, animal agriculture is such an enormous contributor. This statistic, when I first heard it, just shocked me. Animal agriculture accounts for 40% more greenhouse gas emissions than all transportation combined. That's boats, planes, cars, trucks, you name it. You combine all of that, and animal agriculture accounts for 40% more. The UN has actually called it one of the most serious environmental problems, and not just at that global climate change level, but when the animal waste is getting into water tables, contaminating the land, it's making it less usable. So it's really a challenge at all levels. From a food security standpoint, there's a fundamental thermodynamics problem when you're dealing with animals. You have to put in 5, 10, 15, 20 calories of food into an animal to get 1 calorie out. All of those calories that are going into that animal are not going to feed human beings. And we're looking at a forecast of having 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. That is an increase of 2.5 billion, and already we have almost 1 billion living in chronic hunger and malnutrition situations. Human health. Meat diets have been shown to cause all sorts of health problems for the individual. But one of those that is most concerning is the use of antibiotics. And another shocking statistic, 80% of all antibiotics used in the United States go to animal feed. They are not treating human diseases. They are not treating infections. They're simply going in animal feed because the conditions in which animals are factory farmed are just frankly filthy. And so you have to pump these animals full of antibiotics just to keep them healthy and be able to raise them to a slaughtering stage. This is contributing to antibiotic resistance and pathogens that are no longer responsive to those antibiotics. And again, by that year 2050, the estimate is that we will spend, as a world trying to fight diseases, we will spend $100 trillion, trillion with a T, Again, a shocking statistic, but fighting antibiotic resistance is going to cost more than cancer drugs in the near future. And this is a U.S. poll, but every year we see increasing concerns about animal welfare, and people are becoming concerned how animals are treated throughout the animal agriculture system. So we have those, I talked about the thermodynamics problem, so I'll skip through the slide here. Why do people continue to eat meat? Many people know about these problems, and yet meat consumption continues to rise. It comes down to protein and taste. And I just want to point out the one statistic down there in the lower right. People have tried to give up meat. They say, gosh, you know, I don't want to harm animals. I don't want to contribute to global warming. Whatever their motivation might be, they try not to eat meat. Almost half go right back to eating meat because it tastes pretty darn good. They really enjoy it. So this is where cellular agriculture comes in. Cellular agriculture is growing real meat cells, real muscle tissue, real fat tissue, but without the animal. You can do it outside of the animal under clean conditions that don't involve any fecal waste. Sorry, I'm saying that right before dinner. It's really bad of me. But it's clean. We call it clean meat because it's very similar to clean energy, where it does not cause a lot of the problems that we're trying to address with these issues. So let's talk about the technologies. There's two different types of technologies that go into the alternatives to clean meat. And I'm sorry, I'm going to move through very quickly. One of them is an older technology. It's called recombinant technology. You're basically taking little bits of DNA from, say, an animal that produces casein. Casein is a key protein in milk. You can make yeast cells produce that identical protein, remove the protein, purify it, and then create basically your own clean milk that way. Again, it's an old technology. It's used to produce insulin. Does anybody like cheese? I am a cheese freak, I have to admit. Rennet, that is used to produce cheese, is primarily produced by this method. So the IP around this is not as structured and ownable as it can be for other types of clean meat, but the technology is more certain. And there are a couple of different companies that are working on this now. There have been some technological leaps forward that make it more promising now than it used to be. One is that you can get a higher concentration of protein in the final product. The costs of this technology are dropping. The level of purity of the product is going up. And we're finding ways to express ever larger proteins so that you can get the full complexity of the products that you're trying to produce. These are a couple of companies, they're in the startup stages that are working on alternatives to eggs and milk using this technology. Clara Foods is doing the egg, and Perfect Day is doing the milk side. And Perfect Day is getting close to commercialization. They're primarily going through the ingredient route, so you won't quite see a bottle of Perfect Day milk on the shelves in the near future, but it is a possibility for further down the road. Now this is, excuse me, this is clean meat. Now clean meat is where we're talking about actually using real tissues from an animal. So they are on the cellular level, they are absolutely identical to what you would get from an animal. You can produce muscle cells, fat cells, and the connective tissue so that you can make a product that looks like meat, tastes like meat, acts like meat, has the nutritional profile of meat. It is meat. It's just produced without an animal. And it doesn't have to be beef either. You can do this with fish and chicken or any other poultry. The process basically involves two steps. One is that you produce the cells themselves in a bioreactor. It's very similar to the fermentation process you would use for making beer, which we will be having shortly. And so you raise the cells, and then you go to the second step, which is depositing those cells on a scaffold. That scaffold is kind of like the connective tissue in a muscle. And then that produces a product that is very similar to the meat raised on animals. These technologies have been called, from both a technological standpoint and from an investment standpoint, some of the most exciting technologies going on. And this is one of the things that I find so exciting about this in terms of its potential. And I will put the caveat in that we are not at this potential yet, but we could be in the near future. People use all different types of animals all over the world for their food supply. We can actually theoretically produce products that are better than existing animals. And I'll use the example with a beef product. Typically filet mignon is considered kind of like the primary source of beef. Why is it so expensive? Because it tastes great, everybody loves the taste and texture, but you only get like this much out of a whole cow, so it's very rare. With this technology, you could produce nothing but filet mignon. And you can produce it in massive quantities and bring the price down to $2 a pound, for example. Goes even beyond that, though. Let's say you could make a combination of beef, duck, and ostrich. And you could put all of those muscle tissues into a single product and produce customized flavor profiles. It's possible. It sounds like science fiction, and at this point it is fiction. There's a lot of research that needs to be done to make this kind of thing happen, but the potential is absolutely enormous. These are a variety of clean meat companies that are in existence now. The product is not yet commercial. The number one question that I always get when I'm talking about clean meat is, when am I going to be able to taste it? The answer I will always give is, I don't know. There are some who say by 2020 that there will be products available in extremely high-end restaurants that are for very high-end customers, but the cost of these products are coming down rapidly. The very first patty of beef ever produced by this method cost $336,000. But the iPhone, the very first iPhone, cost $2.6 billion to produce. So if you think about it, this is the path that technology takes. The first step is always the hardest, but then you learn and grow and you make it better and make it more affordable. This is not just a Silicon Valley thing, although as you can see on that left side, there are a lot of Silicon Valley organizations participating in this technology. But the world is responding, and there are global investment opportunities. I woke up this morning in Sweden, where I was speaking on this topic this week and last week. And the international drive for this technology is really big. So that brings up the opportunities for investment and entrepreneurship. The companies that I put up on the screen are all trying to produce finished product. And that's a wonderful thing. We need that kind of thing. And it's the sexy, very visible sorts of things. But in the U.S. in the mid-1800s, there was a big gold rush. And you had people moving out west all over the place trying to find gold. The people who got rich during the gold rush were not the miners. They were not the people searching for gold. The people who got rich were the people who supplied blue jeans and pickaxes. This is the opportunity space going around outside of that clean meat, where the investment opportunities, I think, are the biggest. One is in cell line development. That's just a fancy term for creating those individual cells that will then multiply into full tissue. The ability of these cells to multiply is absolutely incredible. A single cell, single turkey cell, can grow at least 100-fold. That means it divides 100 times, and then each of those cells divides and divides and divides. And that doesn't sound like much, but when you add it up, that one cell can produce 40 times the global demand for turkey in a single year. 40 times. So this technology is really able to produce a lot of product that can then go to feed that 2.5 billion extra people we will have in the next 30 years. Cell culture media is another big opportunity. This is the stuff that feeds those cells so that they can grow and multiply. This has been a cost-limiting step so far, but there is a great deal of work going on right now to reduce the costs of the cell media so that, and to make it plant-based so you don't have to rely on animals there's a fetal bovine serum that is often used. But all of the companies working on this right now are looking at a plant-based solution for this, and that will drop the cost dramatically. So those are big opportunities. That scaffolding, that connective tissue that I mentioned on which you then deposit all these cells, that is another very big opportunity where this is where that texture, that meat-like texture will take place. And the opportunity there is to make things that maybe it's even better than filet mignon down the road. And then the bioreactors. This is the actual equipment used to produce these products on massive scales. The scale that will be required to feed a planet is going to be dramatically bigger than the current pharmaceutical scale bioreactors. I'm a chemical engineer by background, so this is the part that gets really exciting to me. But this is another great investment opportunity for organizations to produce the type of equipment needed to make these things happen down the road. Individual investors are jumping all over this. I mentioned Eric Schmidt earlier in the discussion. Li Ka-shing is kind of a big guy here in the Hong Kong area. I think everybody probably knows him. They are making individual investments in these technologies because they see such promise, not only from the return on investment possibility, but also because the absolute need we have for these products from those 4 issues that we're trying to address. But it isn't just individual investors. And personally, I think one of the more exciting things about this is that organizations like Tyson Foods, that's the biggest meat producer in the US, one of the biggest chicken producers in Germany, ADM, Cargill, big name companies are investing in these technologies themselves. They see this as the future, and these organizations are not just investing, but they're redefining themselves. They're saying we're not a meat company, we're a protein company. And so we're going to invest in expanding the variety of proteins that we offer. Oops, sorry. So, many people think this is an impossibility. I think it is an inevitability. These technologies are absolutely necessary to develop. They have such amazing promise that the inevitability of these coming around is at hand. Our role at the Good Food Institute is to try to accelerate that as fast as possible so that we will be able to address those needs as quickly as possible down the road. So that's the end of my presentation. Please feel free to visit our website or to contact me directly. My role, I should have explained, I am the Director of Innovation. What that means for the Good Food Institute context is I recruit entrepreneurs, and I go out and try to, in my organization, we try to help those entrepreneurs learn and grow and execute as effectively as possible. And we connect them with investors as well. So if anybody is interested in meeting some of these entrepreneurs, please contact me and we'll try to make that happen for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. A couple of minutes to go before the drinks, and I will be opening up to questions. Just a quick thing on the drinks, and I'm talking about it all the time. I'm non-alcoholic, I swear. They have been moved to the networking area from the pool house, simply because the weather gods have turned against us. So after this, please head to the networking area. A couple of questions. I saw Michael put his hand up quite quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Do you have a figure for the global market size, potential market size for plant-based and clean meat, or the U.S. market size, or what percentage overall in terms of meat consumption you hope to get to?
Sure. Couple of answers to that. The current market for plant-based meats, so this is not the clean meats that I've talked about. These are products that are made to be meat-like, but they're produced strictly from plants. No animals are involved in the process. That market currently is less than 1% of the global demand for meat. An organization called Lux Research has done some projections of the size of the market based on the ability of animal agriculture to deliver protein against the demand for protein that is increasing. The demand for protein is increasing in two different ways. One, I mentioned the population growth is going up rapidly, but also the per capita demand for protein is increasing. So if you stretch that out, the market for plant-based or clean meats is going to be about 1/3 of all the proteins that are out there. So it is an absolutely enormous growth potential. And we believe within the Good Food Institute that the advantages that clean meat and plant-based meats provide, that 1/3 is actually a lowball estimate, that once these are available and they taste great, they are convenient to acquire, and they are affordable. Once all those things happen, they're going to basically take over the protein market, we believe. But I don't, sorry, that's not a specific figure, but it is astronomical.
Okay. I mean, when it comes to finding that price parity and taste test, when do you think that's going to happen?
For clean meat, it is difficult to predict because there is so much research required to actually make it hit that. The estimates that we've seen are as short as 2 years to get product to market, but that would be very expensive. 10 years to be able to see it in your local grocery stores are some of the estimates. With plant-based meats, I think we are already there in terms of some products in their taste are just absolutely so meat-like. Even my son, who is a complete carnivore, was fooled by the burgers that I made for him once. But the price needs to drop significantly, and that is going to happen as investment in planting some of the protein stocks that are needed will increase.
It can't come soon enough, really. Marcus, question?
Thank you. Arguably, in growing tissue, of course, the need for human tissue is actually much bigger, and from a value perspective, also a much bigger market, particularly skin for burn victims, than liver tissue, which actually is quite easy to, it's the only part of the human body which is regrow, and a very big need for kidney. So firstly, recognizing what you're doing, what are actually the synergies between the human tissue growth for, replacing bad parts in the human body, and second,
Yeah, the technologies are very similar, and so the people working on producing clean meat are learning from people who are trying to produce artificial skin or kidneys or livers and that sort of thing. In terms of the need, That is a difficult thing to assess when you're talking about potentially feeding billions of people who don't currently have access to proteins. Is that a need as great as skin for burn victims? I don't know how to even make that comparison. But we are seeing that there is some excitement coming from the technology area, where people who are working on these cellular technologies are recognizing that the meat industry, which it doesn't seem like it should be all that attractive to them, is something that they can make an enormous impact, positive impact on the world.
Terry.
Terry Roberts with Whitehawk. Is there any science that's going on about the impact to the body as you're digesting these new meats is similar in every respect, the pros and the cons?
Currently, there isn't enough clean meat in the world to
Right.
have a valid study in that area. What we believe, though, is that since these are actual tissues that we've been digesting for millennia, there shouldn't be any adverse effects from these tissues being eaten. And in fact, because they are produced in a clean environment, you don't have to worry about E. coli, salmonella, all of those types of things. The potential is that these could be drastically healthier. You don't have food poisoning issues with clean
that's a
meat
good
that
point.
you do with regular meat. One of the things we like to talk about is anybody is preparing chicken. You're warned, like, if you put raw chicken on a plate, you can't use that plate for anything else. The reason for that is it's basically contaminated. A Consumer Reports study from 2014 found 97% of chicken had some sort of contamination on it. Produced in a clean environment, that wouldn't happen at all. So we believe it's going to be healthier, but there's a lot of research that still needs to be done in that area.
And I'm sorry, one part two. I didn't see any, I don't think, major current meat companies getting into this. Is that changing?
The current meat companies are investing in these
They are.
startup companies. So
Okay.
a great example is Tyson Foods has invested twice in Memphis Meats. Memphis Meats is one of the leading clean meats leaders in getting to that clean meat hurdle, that commercialization space. So yes, they're investing
Good.
in these companies. I mentioned, and I don't recall the name of the German company that produces the most chicken in Germany. They've invested in Super Meats, which is an Israeli company producing clean
Okay.
chicken. So
Good.
yes, it is
Because then they
definitely
won't
something they're doing.
compete.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So great. Thanks.
Sure.
Now, with all great change, naturally comes great opposition. Are you facing any, and from whom?
We have seen some opposition, and I think they're from predictable sources. So a good example is that in the U.S., the Cattlemen's Association has petitioned the USDA to prohibit these products from being called meat. And we'd have to come up with some other creative term for that. Even though it's identical tissue and everything, they don't want it called meat. So there's certainly going to be backlash from people who are concerned that they're going to be harmed by this. One of the things that attracted me to be part of the Good Food Institute is that we're trying to make this change as compassionate for everyone as possible. If the world suddenly became 100% clean meat, there would be a lot of ranchers who would be out of work, and we want to try to help transition them into the new economy as best and as painlessly as we possibly can.
And one last quick question, and what about any cultural opposition? I mean, is clean meat kosher? Is it halal?
That is an interesting question that has not yet been fully resolved. We have had I'm aware of at least one rabbi who has said that even pork produced under clean circumstances would in fact be kosher. But I think there's still a lot of discussion and debate to be had around that.
Excellent. I think that's all we've got time for right now, unless there's any last questions from the audience. No, well, thank you so much, Brad, for coming along.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure.